My name's Simon Dring. I worked for the London Daily Telegraph, 40 years ago this was, and I was in Cambodia when my office in London called and said, would I go to Dhaka because the political situation there was getting very tense and that they felt they should have somebody on the ground in case things began to deteriorate or get out of hand. So I arrived here on March the 6th, 1971, and to be quite honest, I knew very little about the political situation here. Um, my, my birthing, if you like, was actually on March the 7th at the racecourse when Sheikh Mujib gave that famous speech. And I was actually standing on the platform only a few yards away from him. I don't speak Bengali, but I have to say that in that 20-minute speech, listening to him, seeing the reaction of this huge crowd there, I understood everything that was going on. It was extraordinary. There was that one phrase in particular where he said, the struggle now is a struggle for our emancipation. The struggle now is the struggle for our independence, Joy Bangla. And I promise you, the hairs almost stood up on the back of my neck because I didn't understand it, but I understood it. And if you like, it was at that moment I began to really get a feel for what was happening in what was then East Pakistan, and the conflict that was evolving between the West and the East, and Yahya Khan and Bhutto and the other players who were here supposedly trying to resolve the situation. Over the next few weeks until March 25th, I got to know Sheikh Mujib and other leaders of the Awami League. So by the time March 25th arrived, I felt as though I had a reasonably good understanding of what was happening. The first warning bells were sounded around about 5 o'clock on the afternoon of March 25th when we heard that Yahya Khan had left. That was a very bad sign. Everyone got very nervous very quickly that something was about to happen. There'd been rumors of military action for some time. It now seemed as though it was inevitable, that whatever people were saying, there was no longer room for talk, only action as far as the Pakistanis were concerned. Certainly the whole city began to become a little bit uneven and unstable. Some troops appeared outside the hotel here. This was the Intercontinental then, and this is where most of the journalists were based who were covering the situation. There were up to 200 journalists here, and clearly they were not encouraging or allowing you to leave. So it all began around about 11 o'clock on that night of the 25th when the first convoys of Pakistani troops rolled down the airport road from the cantonment. And that's when we knew that we were about to witness something extraordinary. We also, amongst ourselves, knew that somehow, given the scale of the killing that was obviously taking place in this city, the scale of the massacre, because it was a one-sided thing, there was nobody shooting back, that they were never going to let us out to see what was going on. And sure enough, on the evening of the 26th, about 24 hours later, when there was still shooting going on around the old city and the Hindu areas, the man who was liaising with the foreign press, and a Pakistani intelligence officer, Major Siddiqui, came to the hotel and he spread the word out amongst the journalists that civil war had broken out and that for our own safety, because we might be killed by these Bengali buggers, he called them, he said, we're going to take you out of the country. And so I went up to him and I said, Major Siddiqui, Simon Dring, Daily Telegraph. He said, yes, I know who you are. I said, I hear that we have to leave. He said, yes, for your own safety, for your own safety. I said, well, is this an order? Oh, no, it's not an order, just for your own safety. So I said to him, so I don't have to leave then, I can stay. He said, you can, but it might be dangerous for you. So I said, well, what will happen if I stay? And he said, well, there might be a party for you. Whatever that meant. They were going to take all the foreign press corps, put them in trucks and buses, take them to the airport, fly them out to Karachi, and then on the morning of the 27th, they had to lift the curfew. And they couldn't afford for any journalist to get out and document the scale of the killings and the massacres that had taken place in Dhaka that night. And believe me, there was a lot of dead people out there, and they didn't want us to see it. So I personally actually felt very angry about this, and angry professionally that we're being denied the opportunity to actually go out and document the scale of the killings. And personally, I knew many Bengalis, and I knew that a lot of innocent people had been killed, and that somehow you couldn't allow this to happen. And it made you angry that the Pakistan army thought they could get away with this. And that was really appalling, and it did make you angry. So I decided that I'd try and hide out. So I went to my room, packed my bags. So I looked good intent, you know. I packed my bags. Oh yes, Major Dick, I'm ready to leave. And then I came up and I hid on the roof. Well, on the night of the 26th, this was where I came to hide. The Pakistan army was rounding up the journalists, and I escaped that by coming up onto the roof and hiding actually down here under what was then an air conditioning unit. And in this way I felt a little bit secure, but at the same time I could go to the edge of the roof and see when the journalists who had been rounded up by the Pakistan army were taken away. And I thought, well, if I can get away with it, if they don't count the number of journalists getting onto the trucks and buses, I'm okay. If they do count and say, where is that fellow from the Daily Telegraph? Then I can say, oh, I'm sorry, I packed my bags, I was planning to come, I just went for a walk, you know. So I came up here and I spent about 3 very nervous hours up here, waiting to see what happened. And sure enough, around about 10 o'clock, all the journalists came out, all their suitcases, they put them onto trucks and in buses, and I was peering over the edge of the roof, and I thought, well, still they might count them, you know, who knows, and maybe Major Siddiqui's there and he'll recognize I'm not with them. So half an hour went by and the trucks left, feeling, oh, I've made it. And I thought, well, maybe they'll count them on the way to the airport and come back again. So I stayed up here for another hour, and then I felt secure that they had gone. So after that, I kind of worked my way down floor by floor, making sure there was no security people on each floor, and made my way to find the Bengali staff at the reception, who were very excited that you stayed. I said, yes, we want to see what's happened. And they said, there's somebody else stayed as well, that Michel Laurent of AP, a photographer. I said, oh, fantastic, because I'm not a photographer. The next morning, they had arranged for a little baker's van, and almost like a motorized rickshaw with a sort of cabin on the back. We put on kurta pajama, I mean, some attempt to disguise ourselves anyway. We got in the back of this little van, and we said we needed to go to university, to Dhanmondi, to Sheikh Mujib's house, to the Old City, to the Rajabag police lines, as much as we could without being seen, to photograph what had happened and to take notes. And the first port of call we went to was the Dhaka University. And I have to say that it was an appalling sight. We got out, and the baker's van went and hid under some trees. And we were able to actually walk around the campus carefully. I counted about 30 bodies there. I believe many more must have been killed. Certainly in the dormitories of Iqbal Hall, there was a lot of blood. I saw a student dead in his bed. There were students lying in the lake, or dead bodies. I couldn't identify all these. But there were about 30 bodies I counted in that area. And quite clearly the army had come in. They'd set up mortars on top of the British Council. They'd mortared the dormitory area, the campus area. Then they'd gone in and just shot people. And the students probably sat there thinking, oh, they'll just arrest us, but they were mistaken. And unfortunately and sadly, many were killed that night, as were teachers. We spoke to some people in the area. They said at least 7 teachers had been killed. A family of 12 in an outhouse near one of the dormitories had been killed. Unfortunately, we were not very careful, which we should have been, and an army patrol had gone by the end of the road that led to Iqbal Hall while we were taking pictures, and they had spotted us. Now, whether they thought we were journalists or what, but we were clearly foreigners, and we were clearly doing something we shouldn't be doing as far as the army was concerned. So we knew that, unfortunately, word would be out now that somebody was around. Perhaps 2 journalists had escaped the net. So we thought we had to keep moving, keep hidden as much as we could. And we then set out, we went to the Hindu area and to the old part of the city, quite close to the university. a market area, I forget the name of the market, had also been attacked, and about 200 yards of houses had been burnt down. There were people dead in front of their shops. I counted at least 4 or 5 bodies there, but many more, I'm sure, had been killed in the burnt out shops. When we got to the Hindu area, quite clearly again, there'd been a very deliberate attempt to kill people. I understand that I was told by some people there that at night they'd gone around firing flares into the night, and then people were pointing out, razakas of some sort, pointing out which houses were supporters of Sheikh Mujib, and the occupants were taken out and killed, just shot in the street. But everywhere we went, there was indications of the scale of the killing. I met one police officer. He had 240 officers in his division, and he had only found 30 of them, and they were all dead. In the old part of the city, I spoke to an old man where clearly large areas had just been burnt and razed to the ground. He said the tactic was the Pakistan army would come to the end of a street, they would send a unit down, shooting into the houses, followed by another unit that poured petrol, and they set fire to the buildings, to the houses, just shanty houses. And those that weren't burnt alive inside, if they ran out, they were shot dead. Again, just a deliberate attempt to terrify and frighten people and to kill people. At 32 Dalmundi, we spoke to neighbors who told us how Sheikh Mujib had been arrested. At around about 12 o'clock, we knew we'd been in contact with Mujib on the phone from the hotel here at around 12. He had said that he was not going to go into hiding, that if he did, he was frightened that they would, as he said, burn the whole of Dhaka down to find me. He'd sent away most of his staff except for three staff and 1 bodyguard, and he was waiting for them to come for him. And they came for him at around about 1:10 in the morning, a tank, an armored car, some troops and a jeep, and a couple of officers. And Mujib came out apparently onto his balcony and said, "What is all this shooting? All you had to do was telephone me and I would have come." And they said, "So come down, Sheikh, come down." And he came down and they arrested him. The Rajabag police lines, there were 1,100 police in dormitories there. We don't know how many were killed, but they'd fired incendiary devices into the dormitories. Most of them were burnt down, and a lot must have been killed. So this was the pattern right across the city. And I have to say that after several hours moving around this city, Michel and I realized that the scale of the massacres here were really extensive. We don't know how many were killed, but we estimate probably in the region of 7,000 people could well have lost their lives over that 24-hour period. At every place we went, there was no indication of anybody shooting at the Pakistan army. This was just clearly a deliberate attempt to kill people, to teach the people of this country a lesson, to say to them, forget about independence, this is united Pakistan, this is Pakistan. The problem we then had was, how do we get this film out? How do we get my notes out without losing them all? I mean, to be quite honest, although you could remember a lot of the information, you had to get your notes out. They were an important part of the whole documentation of what had gone on. And you needed to get the photographs out, of course. The problem was that we had been spotted, and there were suspicions that a couple of journalists had obviously hidden out or stayed on. So when we got back to the hotel, the Bengali staff here were very nervous. They said the army had already been here and searched the hotel and said, are there any journalists staying here? And they said, no, of course there's nobody here. They said, we have to find ways of hiding you because we think the army is going to come back. And sure enough, from about 2-3 o'clock on the afternoon of the 27th, right through that night, the army came back 2 more times. The Bengali staff here set up a system whereby they knew where we were at all times. Whenever the army appeared at the front desk or the reception or the front foyer, they would contact us, and the Bengali staff who were with us would hide us somewhere. We then had to find a way how we're going to get out. I called the British High Commission, but they were extremely unhelpful. they took the attitude that if you're supposed to leave and the Pakistan Army's told you to, then you should have left. There's not much we can do. And they certainly weren't going to help take our film out or anything like that. A German couple in the hotel contacted their embassy, and their embassy agreed to take out 9 rolls of film in the diplomatic bag. So we divided up the film and we gave 9 rolls to them. Unfortunately, they disappeared. So we don't know what the motives of the German embassy were. The only way we could get out was by air. There was no way we could get out over land. We'd be stopped at the first roadblocks. Foreigners, we couldn't do it. So Pakistan Airlines were flying a shuttle of planes to Karachi, and that many of the West Pakistanis and foreigners who wanted to leave because of the fighting were issued numbers. And this German couple in the hotel very kindly gave Michelle and I their numbers, which enabled us to get on a flight on the morning of the 28th. So we went to the airport, trying to look as normal as possible, as like touristies or NGO workers, and hoping they wouldn't think we were journalists. We spread the cameras around a bit. We hid the film in the bottom of a sponge bag underneath soap and toothpaste. I put all my notes in my socks under my feet, and I taped them to the back of my belt, and we waited. And we went through immigration, and we got to customs. Customs were searching everybody very carefully, but they didn't seem to think we were journalists, so they didn't search us any more than any of the others. They took away any touristy books, any maps and things like that, which they said were of military significance, but they did that to everybody. They got us onto the plane. We were called to the plane, and believe me, I was very nervous, because if we were caught and if they found out who we were, I'm sure the consequences would indeed have been very unpleasant. It is absolutely true, but we were sitting in the plane on the runway waiting to be called to take off, and I couldn't believe it, but there was Major Siddiqui and 2 of his people walked across the runway towards the immigration, and I thought, he must have heard, you know, and I thought, this is it. They're going to find out that we've gone through and they'll take us. And but nothing happened. So the plane took off, and I thought, well, if there is any suspicions, if Major Siddiqui really is onto this, he'll send a message to Karachi. So I thought, well, when we get to Colombo, we'll try and get political asylum. We don't want to go to Karachi. So of course, we went into transit at Colombo. I called the British High Commission in Colombo and asked them to help us get asylum, and they told us to go away, of course, you know. So anyway, we ended up in Karachi that night, and we thought by this time for sure a message would have come from Bangladesh or from East Pakistan and said, detain these people, take everything off them, whatever. There didn't seem to be, but customs were suspicious of us. We were taken into separate rooms. I was made to take all my clothes off. They stuck a pencil up my bottom, obviously looking for film or anything like that. And I was sitting there naked with all my clothes and all my notes in my socks lying on the floor. So I thought, this is going to be a problem putting my socks back on. And the army policeman in the customs there said, okay, you can go now and put your clothes on. So I put my clothes on, but pulling my socks on with all the notes, everything was crumpled up. So I had this huge wad of paper under my feet, which makes it very difficult to walk. So there I am, at least I've got my notes still intact, and I'm trying to look very normal and walk very normally, which was not actually very, very easy. And Michelle and I were taken by security guards to the departure lounge to await the Pan Am flight that was flying from Karachi to Bangkok. He had also been strip searched. Nobody had found his film. They weren't very clever. It was, as I say, hidden under toothpaste and soap and things like that. And so we knew we had everything intact. We now had to wait 2 or 3 hours for the Pan Am flight. Believe me, when it came and we got on there and it took off, it was like the most fantastic feeling. And that day, I wrote my story and filed it. These were the first documentation of the scale of the Pakistani massacres in Dhaka. It was a very important story for us professionally, but also personally. And it's not often in your life that you can actually write a story or report a story that that individuals get value from. You know, it's not just a war story, it's not just, there's something very intensely personal about it. And you felt as though you were able to serve people in a way you couldn't normally do as a journalist. And when I got back to London, and you know, this appeared across many columns in the Daily Telegraph, I remember going to restaurants and Bangladeshis coming up and saying, oh, it was so important, that story. We knew nothing of what was happening in our country. And for the first time, we got a real understanding of what was happening. Awful as it was, the story, at least we knew what was happening. On the 27th, we were able to see all the Bangladeshi flags coming down and the Pakistani ones going up. But then 9 months later, in December, when I came back here, and I rode down from Mymensingh with the Mukti Bahini from Tangail and with the Indian tanks and things, and was here in December 16, was to see all the Pakistani flags coming down and the Bangladeshi flags going up again. So it was like completing the circle. And it was very satisfying to have been here at the beginning and then here at the end, to see independence arrive and to see the Bengalis get their just desserts, as it were, and to get what they needed and wanted. And I have to say, one of the first things I wanted to do was to go to the cantonment and find Major Siddiqui. And I found him. And it gave me great pleasure to walk up to him and say, Major Siddiqui, how are you? I'm really sorry that you've ended up here, you know, really sorry. I mean, for your own safety, obviously you are here, you know. And he sort of smiled a bit and he said, yes, he said, yes, things do change, don't they? I said, yeah. I said, tell me, Major Siddiqui, I've been waiting 9 months to ask you this. What would you have done if you had found me? And he said, we probably would have killed you. I said, oh, well, at least you're honest. He said, well, put it this way, we wouldn't have killed you. You would have been killed in the crossfire because we were telling you, you have to leave for your own safety. So you would have been killed. And it's true. They could not have afforded to let us out. So they could easily have found a way to have had us killed and just our bodies on the street, which would have been, and they would have got away with it. So it was very nice to at least sort of confront him that way. And it was also extraordinary for me the next month to be here when, if you like, the crowning moment when Sheikh Mujib came out of prison and returned to Bangladesh. And I have to say, I climbed onto the back of the truck along with some others, and we held onto the back of the truck and came into Dhaka with these crowds, and the atmosphere was like it was on March the 7th. It was fantastic, you know, incredible atmosphere, and a very special moment. And it was like completing the circle in the history of the independence of Bangladesh. I just want to say too that, you know, although, you know, people recognize that this story and the photographs of Michel were very important factors in informing the world of what had happened. But I should also say that, you know, and the government has recognized this 40 years later. We've been given awards, myself and many other foreigners who in many other ways, many of them more important than mine certainly, have contributed to the independence and liberation of this country. And I was very honored to be amongst all those who were awarded in the same way. But I'd like to say also that, you know, the people who deserve the most recognition are the people of this country. I think of the young Bengalis in the hotel here who helped keep us hidden, who helped us get around the city. They're the ones who we really should honor today. And all those others who lost their lives over the next 9 months, they were the ones who really put themselves out there to fight and to win the independence of this country.